Hey, a question I get a lot with regard to horror is, which monster is your favorite, Sandy? But you know what I'm never asked? Which monster is my least favorite? In former years, I would unhesitatingly have said the Sand Dwellers. Now, let's talk about the Sand Dwellers. Not much is known about them. Where did these things come from? Well, they first appear in a story by August Derleth named The Gable Window. Now, Derleth claimed it was a posthumous collaboration between himself and Lovecraft, but most of Derleth's collaborations consisted of like one sentence or even a fragment of a sentence from Lovecraft, and the rest is all Derleth's writing. I see no reason to think that The Gable Window is different. So I'm going to give August Derleth 100% of the credit and the blame for the Sand Dwellers. Now, in one part of the story, the hero looks through his magical window that lets him see Lovecraftian places, and he sees the American Southwest. Some creatures come out of a cave accompanied by bats. The creatures are described as emaciated humanoids with gritty sand-like skin, huge claws, and heads that resemble those of a koala with huge ears. I gotta say, the koala bear head was kind of a sticking point for me. While I don't think that koalas are super cute, they're certainly not very frightening. In general, this is a good demonstration of why I feel August Derleth is a weaker horror writer than Lovecraft. When Lovecraft invents something, it's hideously terrifying. When Derleth does, it's kind of feeble. For example, when Lovecraft described a flying horror from outside, he said, "It was not altogether crows, nor moles, nor buzzards, nor ants, nor vampire bats, nor decomposed human beings, but something I cannot and must not recall. They flopped limply along, half with their webbed feet and half with their membranous wings." So that's a creepy sounding thing. I liked it so much I kind of based my Byakhee off that. Now, when Derleth described a Byakhee, a flying horror from outside, he said it was like a giant humanoid bat. A giant bat is scary, I guess, but it certainly doesn't have the imagination stimulating alien vibe that Lovecraft's creatures were. Anyway, back to the Sand Dwellers. So as the hero's watching the Sand Dwellers crawl out of the cave, some tentacles kind of emerge from the cave too, and then he gets scared and he turns off the gable window, which works a lot like a magical TV set. Oh yeah, and he says they're Sand Dwellers. The guy knows they're Sand Dwellers from the Necronomicon or something, I guess. So what do we get from this about the Sand Dwellers? First, they live in the American Southwest. Maybe elsewhere too? Second, they seem to be nocturnal underground beings. They're coming out of a cave and it's dusk. So, underground, dusk, you know. They apparently are willing to work with other larger beings. The tentacle thing doesn't seem to be chasing them, it's like following up on them. So really my problem with the Sand Dwellers, well, besides the koala head, is that they seem really boring. They're just skinny little servant creatures that live in the desert. I guess Derleth was thinking the ocean has deep ones and outer space has Byakhees, so he needed something from the desert, but he didn't add anything to them. Not that he had much time in the story to do it. There are a couple paragraphs in the whole story. He sees other things too. You see, deep ones, let's take them, have an astonishing convoluted biology. I have a whole video on them, and here's a link. Byakhees are predators from outer space, all by itself. That's pretty astonishing. I have a whole video on them too. But Sand Dwellers, we get that one single scene. Years later, there was a novel written titled The Sand Dwellers. It's mostly psychological horror, and the actual Sand Dweller creatures don't make much of an appearance, though their psychic energy is being applied. It's not totally clear. Or maybe it is clear, but I read the book so long ago I don't remember. If you're curious, the novel's still available. Probably I should read it again. Anyway, like I said, the novel's writer doesn't actually work much with what Derleth created. Probably because Derleth didn't give him much to work with. About 30 years ago on Halloween, we had more trick-or-treaters than I'd expected, and we ran out of candy. Near the end of the night, some kids came by, and because they didn't have candy, I went to my figure collection, and I gave each kid a little Sand Dweller miniature from Grenadier Models. I had like 12 of them, and they were my least favorite miniature. I did keep one complete set for myself to become a completist, so there you are. I had so little regard for the Sand Dwellers that I gave them away to children I didn't even know. When I did Cthulhu Wars, I was really proud of the fact that I'm now the greatest creator of Lovecraft figures in the world. I've made miniature figures of practically every Lovecraft monster. I've done the King in Yellow, Nofkez, Serpentmen, Azathoth, Doles, and Bowls, and Ron-Dagoth. I even have really obscure ones like the Sorcerers of Yadith or Robert Bloch's Dark Demon from Nyarlathotep. Once I licensed his work, I was able to show off Ramsey Campbell's inventions, Deoloth, Ihort, the insects from Shagai. Really, the only major creatures I don't have are the inventions of Brian Lumley, such as his Chthonians. Now, Mr. Lumley declined to sell us the rights with finality, and I respect his decision. I suspect he holds a slight grudge from the 1980s when Chaosium ignorantly published his creatures without any permission. Who can blame Mr. Lumley? I want to do it right this time, but hey, it's his invention, it's his decision. Anyway, I have a ton of Cthulhu figures to my credit. What I didn't make were Sand Dwellers. I didn't put them in my Petersen's Field Guide. I didn't add them to Cthulhu Wars. I didn't put them in Sandy Petersen's Cthulhu Mythos. So last year I started thinking about this. Not because I felt I owed anything to the Sand Dwellers, heaven knows, but I thought it might be an interesting intellectual exercise to try to make the Sand Dwellers scary. Almost everything from here on about the biology and culture is my own invention. It's story time by Sandy, but I think the stuff I created fits the background and works with them and also makes them more interesting as a monster. I did this by using them in one of my Cthulhu Mythos sagas, Skin Deep. The first step is, though, how to make them scary but use everything we know about them. The Sand Dwellers seem to live in pretty well-traversed places like the American Southwest. Now, Arsterleth lived in Wisconsin. He probably didn't know much about the Mojave, but the actual American Southwest has a lot of people, and you'd think somebody would have seen these creatures. Deep ones live under the sea. Hard to see them. Nofkez and the Greenland Ice. Who goes there? But Sand Dwellers? I've driven through those deserts scores of times. There needs to be a reason I don't see Sand Dwellers. I mean, besides the fact that they don't exist. So my first answer is, what if they don't live in the Southwest?
Nice.
What if they live in another plane of existence, but can travel to ours? Now, I don't want to make him just another dimensional shambler, so maybe they can only go here with difficulty. They came out of the cave, because that's where there was a portal. Maybe the big tentacle monster that appeared with them helped bring them through. I decided to invent or use the Violet Dimension as their place of origin. I had to call it something, and that's already a known place. And I decided that though they could return to the Violet Dimension whenever they wanted, they couldn't leave it easily. This would explain why Sand Dwellers are rarely seen, and if they do commit some crime, they can then immediately escape, leaving no trace. So it's a one-way trip for them. The novel about the Sand Dwellers seems to indicate that they can affect human minds. I like this a lot because, of course, it's scary, but I want them to do it with a purpose. Now, I remember that the Sand Dwellers are described as really thin with weird crusty skin and especially odd heads. Also, they're surprisingly humanoid for a Lovecraft monster. They have 2 arms, they have 2 legs, they have a head, they can even stand erect. Now, when a Lovecraft monster resembles people, it's for a reason. The deep ones resemble us because Cthulhu designed them to mate with us. The ghouls resemble us because they actually are a subgroup of human. So why would the Sand Dwellers look like us unless they have a connection? So I spent time thinking about their scrawny, thin bodies, their weird heads, their odd hairless, but not scaly skin, almost crusty, like it's covered with scabs. Then it came to me. What if the Sand Dwellers literally emerge from us? In other words, they gestate inside us, using our bodies as like a cocoon. They grow their flesh around our bones. Then when they're ripe, they emerge. That would explain why they're thin. They have to be thinner than us to use us as, a pupil case. And think of this. They're skinnier because they're inside us, and the head, the weird proportions of the head make sense too, because they're sense organs, the nose, the eyes, the ears, can't just grow inside our eyes. They have to reach out, go out to our ears. So, for example, say that you took that a creature grew inside our head with a smaller head. Well, that head would have to have, who still use the same eyes, had to have pop eyes reaching out to our, like if the head was an inch further in, the eyes had to extend out an inch to cover our eyes. The nose would have to extend out an inch to cover our nose. The ears would extend out. They'd look like they had huge ears, huge eyes, and a huge nose. So just in order to use our sense organs at all, which you can't just grow another set inside. So they'd look maybe not like a koala exactly, but like a distorted, hideous version of a koala. So the weird head makes sense. How do they get inside of us? Well, we talked about them being from another dimension, having mental powers. I think it's psychic invasion. They one of them sends its mind from the Violet Dimension to begin the takeover. So they start growing inside us. Now, the mixture of the Sand Dweller mind and the human mind probably makes the human go insane, at least to an extent. My theory is the human seems normal at first and doesn't realize what's happening, but inside, the Sand Dweller bloodlust essentially turns the human into a serial killer. Or, maybe the Sand Dwellers target serial killers. Anyway, in my adventure saga, Skin Deep, it starts out seeming to be about a serial killer like Jack the Ripper. As the human commits more murders, the sand dweller gets stronger and stronger. Finally, it's fully in control, and then the human part kind of is gone. It only uses a shell. But then the human flesh dies, starts to rot, and finally the sand dweller has to cut his way out. So now we have creatures that turn humans into maniacs and then emerge into our world. What else? Well, remember the big tentacle monster that the sand dwellers appeared with in the original Gable Window story? I thought about it. The tentacle thing doesn't necessarily seem like a great old one, but it was some kind of powerful being. I don't think it's the standard sand dweller powerful being. I think the answer is that the sand dwellers adopt powerful entities for their protectors. I'd guess dangerous but like second tier creatures like Bokrug, Beatus, maybe a rat bat spider, or a really big Shoggoth, something eager for the patronage of the sand dwellers, that easy to please and a good defender. So different sand dwellers would cynically pick different creatures and go to that thing and say, hey, we'll serve you if you help guide and protect us. And the creature is like, yeah, I mean, I'm glad to have you. So here we have the sand dwellers as I see them. They seep into you from outside, they replace you with a horror beyond imagination, and when enough of them have arrived, they bring in other, even more fearsome creatures to accompany them. And the only hope is that eventually they may leave without a trace. Check out Skin Deep to see more of my take on sand dwellers. Like me, subscribe to me, get notifications, and get the Skin Deep or other things from my store. Thanks.